Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Tom Glinsky, Chief Inspector with the Board of Pharmacy. Today, our webinar is dedicated to pharmacy technicians, so we hope there's a lot of technicians on our webinar today. Before we get started with the webinar, I'll just go over a few things, especially if you haven't been on our webinars before. All participants are in listen-only mode. You're all muted. If you have any trouble connecting via the computer to the audio, there is an option on your toolbar to change to the call-in number. If you change that setting, you'll get a phone number and an access code that you can dial in over the telephone. This program has been approved for 1 hour of pharmacy continuing education. You must be logged in to GoToWebinar under your own username in order to get credit. We'll go over more instructions at the end of the webinar on how to obtain the CE. We do not report CE to the CPE monitor, so it's important to save your certificates. Because this is dedicated to technicians today, we do get some questions from technicians on can I use this CE for my renewal of my certification? This program today is not an ACPE accredited program. We do not know the answer to that question on if you can use it for your renewal. You would need to ask your certification provider, either PCTB or Accept, and ask them if they will accept a board-provided CE program. We also get questions, since this is dedicated to technicians, can pharmacists do the webinar and get CE for their renewal? Yes, we will issue pharmacist CE for doing today's webinar. If you'd like handouts of the slides today, there's 2 places you can find that. One's on the board's website under upcoming events tab on the left of the screen. I mean, the left of the web page. And then on your GoToWebinar toolbar, if you go to the little tab that says handouts and expand that, you will see a PDF of the handouts for today. We do record all our webinars, and you can find them on the board's websites. It usually takes, it can take 10 to 14 days before a webinar will show up there, a recording of one though. If we have time today, we will take questions at the end of the program. You can submit your questions anytime during the program by going to your toolbar, going to the questions tab, typing in your question, and hit send. Okay, so today we'll go ahead and get started. I kind of broke it down into different topics. We'll talk about renewal, since that's going on right now. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities of technicians, some new opportunities that have come up over the last few years for technicians in the practice of pharmacy. We'll talk about compliance issues related to technicians, and then we'll talk about some of the resources the board has out there for technicians. So we'll jump into renewals. The renewal period is happening right now. All technician registrations expire on May 31st. The board sent out renewal notices by email at the first week of March. If you had an email on file, you only received an email notification. If you did not have an email address on file with the board, you were mailed a paper renewal. I believe it was probably a postcard. Last week, we did send a reminder postcard out to anyone who had not renewed by the end of last week. As of yesterday, approximately 45% of technicians have submitted and we processed their renewals. After May 31st, if you do not renew, you cannot work as a technician. However, you can still renew your license up till June 30th. However, during that month of June, you can't work as a technician, but you still can renew it. After June 30th, if you have not submitted your renewal, you would have to go through the new process of submitting a new application and being fingerprinted again. So it's real important to get your registration renewed before May 31st and definitely by June 30th, or you'll have to go through the process again. So you can renew online. If you go to the board's website, on the left side of it, you'll see a tab that says Online Services Renewal Reporting. You click that, you will see this, and there's 3 options here. You can renew online, there's a link to request your renewal PIN. The renewal process online requires you to have your PIN. If you do not have your PIN, you can go to that second link there and request your PIN be sent to you. And then if you would like to receive a paper version of your renewal application, that third link there will get you that, where the board will either email or fax you, I believe, a copy of the renewal. And just to tell you, of that, the 45%, I believe it's in almost 98% of people renew online is the preferred method, and that's what we're seeing by most people. So pharmacy technician, by definition in the regulation, it's a person who is assisting in the practice of pharmacy or someone who has independent access to the drug inventory. If you meet either one of those, you are required to be registered with the board. Some pharmacy choose to register others, even though they may not be doing those two functions, but they can anyone can be registered with the board. So occasionally we get people who say they don't understand why they're registered because they don't do these things. It's a choice of your employer to have you become registered. Board of Pharmacy registration is not the same thing as technician certification. That is a different program. It's not related to the board in any way. Those are independent organizations that do the technician certification. Currently, there are two, I believe two right now, organizations that do that. Certification is not a requirement in order to get a Board of Pharmacy registration. So there may be a requirement for some employers that want to hire a technician, but it is not a requirement for the board in order to be registered with the board. However, there are certain activities that technicians are now allowed to do that does require certification. The board's rules require that as one of the conditions in order for the technician to be able to conduct that activity. We'll talk more about those activities later on in the program. So in regulation, there are certain things that a technician cannot do. And basically, they can assist in the practice of pharmacy, but this is a list of some of the things that are prohibited from a technician from doing. They cannot transfer a controlled substance prescription to another pharmacy. Any data entry that they cannot perform data entry verification, so they can't check the work of another technician and the data they're entering in the computer. They cannot perform final product verification except under some new allowances we'll talk about later in the program called technology assisted verification. Other than that, technicians are not allowed to check the work of another technician. They cannot counsel a patient. A technician cannot make decisions that require professional judgment. An example we come across sometimes is a technician actually conducting a DUR message override when they're processing a prescription in the computer, and they're independently overriding DUR messages that a pharmacist should be making that judgment on how they're overridden. And then a technician is not allowed to go to a long-term care facility and apply a prescription label to a prescription that's at that facility in case there was like a dosage or a therapy change. Now today, I just tell you in today's, I'm talking about activities that are under the board's jurisdiction. There will be some things that would vary for technicians that work in hospitals who their activity is actually under the Department of Health's jurisdiction. So today I'm strictly speaking on board's jurisdiction. So pharmacists must verify the work of technicians. That includes filled prescriptions. Now there are some allowances, as I mentioned, under technology assisted verification, and certain classes have allowances that the work doesn't have to be checked immediately. But when a pharmacist is checking the work of a technician, the filled prescription, they're checking both the contents and the affixed label. They can't just look to see, oh, the bottle that, what the stock bottle is. They actually have to look and see what's actually in the prescription and the label that is affixed to it. Pharmacists must also verify the work when a technician reconstitutes an antibiotic or when they're compounding. All that needs to be checked prior to going to the patient. And whenever a technician does a data entry into the computer system, that has to be checked by a pharmacist. However, there are some exceptions for certain classes, FQ and L, that have some special exemptions. So the technician responsibilities, the first, kind of as we talked to earlier, is to keep your license renewed by May 31st each year. You are required by regulation to keep the board updated on address changes and employment changes and name changes. The first two can be done online. The third one, I believe, does require submission of some documentation of the name change, so it does not happen online. So if you go online to the board's website, again to the tab on the online services tab, they are highlighted on the left. If you look down on the right, there is a link for individual contact address and employee changes. If you go to that, you can then make those changes online and submit them online easily to the board. Technicians need to respond to board correspondence. There could be a variety of types of correspondence. If you have an application pending, sometimes the board will correspond with you on that. House Bill 600 is a process where licenses can get suspended if they don't have their state income tax paid up. If that were to occur, you would get notices from the Department of Revenue. You'd also get notices from the board before that suspension actually occurs. The board does send out letters to technicians, especially related to investigation matters. Some of those request a response back to the board. And then a request from inspectors. Inspectors could be trying to contact you based on a investigation, could be on something related to an inspection that they're asking some for information on. So you need to communicate with the board when asked. A technician needs to be honest with their employer. That starts at the employment application. Are you being honest on the application when they're asking about previous history, criminal history, any previous employment history, items like that? Criminal history is important to your employer because if they're registered with the DEA or BNDD, they may be required to get a waiver if you have certain convictions to be allowed to let you work there. So if they need to be aware of that, and they need to be aware not only at time of employment, but ongoing if you get a conviction related to drug charges, they need to be aware of that. Again, they need to be aware if you get any kind of House Bill 600 tax suspension letter saying your license has been suspended. And then you also need to make them aware of if there's any discipline issued by the board. We'll talk more about that on a later slide, but if you apply for a technician license through that process, you may get a conditional registration, which is similar to probation. You would need to make sure your employer is aware of that. This goes back to being honest with the board on license applications. There's questions on there about previous history, and the same thing applies to your license renewal. There are questions related to have you had any convictions in the last year that you need to be honest with answering that. During inspections, inspectors will ask technicians questions. You should be honest, you give an honest answer of what's occurring at the pharmacy. And then during investigations, there are times inspectors will need to talk to technicians that were involved in whatever the issue is. Make sure you're properly trained. Employers should be providing you training on the task you're doing. I recommend you don't do a task if you've not been trained for. If you don't understand something, you need to speak up. If you think you were trained but need further retrainings, make sure you ask your employer for that. You need to be aware of your pharmacy's policies and procedures. You need to know them, you need to review them on occasion, and don't be afraid to speak up, especially when what the procedure says doesn't really match what's going on in the pharmacy, or speak up when you have a suggestion on how to improve something at the pharmacy. Here's a list of some of the things that you probably should, if you're not aware of how to handle these, you should ask your employer, because these are all things that could come up while you're working. How do you handle a coworker who shows up impaired at the pharmacy? They're either impaired on drugs or alcohol or some other issue that is impairing their function to work. How would you handle that? Who do you report that to? So these things. Your own substance abuse. If you have a substance abuse problem, does your employer have a program to assist you with that? You should have a conversation with your employer. Robbery, as we see more and more thefts and burglaries and robberies going on, do you know how to handle that if you were working and a robbery takes place? What is your employer's policy procedure on how to handle that? How do you handle a breach of confidentiality, a HIPAA breach? How do you handle drug diversion? If you witness drug diversion happening or theft of any sort by another employee, do you know how to report that to your employer? If you're the processing technician on new prescriptions, if you believe a prescription is fraudulent, do you know what the procedure is on how to handle that at your pharmacy? If you suspect healthcare fraud's going on at your pharmacy, are you aware of that? All pharmacy employees do fraud, waste, and abuse training. But are you aware of the procedure that your employer uses? If you see employees not following procedures, do you know how to report that? Or any kind of violation of pharmacy laws and regulations? So if you're not aware of how to handle these things, you should be asking your employer to give you some guidance on that. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be complacent. You need to report issues. It may be to the pharmacist that's working with you that day or to other supervisors or management. And you can also report things directly to the Board of Pharmacy. You can do that via direct to inspectors. On the board's website is a link to a list of all the inspectors and their counties and zip codes in the St. Louis area. You can find out who your inspector is if you're not aware who that is. You can also report things directly to the Board of Pharmacy office. Later on, I'll have a slide on how to do all that. You need to speak up if you're asked to do something you know that's not correct. Over the years, I've had times where technicians have been asked to do these things: dispense an outdated drug, create a fraudulent record, cover up an error, practice unsupervised, or provide, and this kind of goes to the next one, provide a prescription to a patient when no pharmacist is present. Now, there are some exceptions in different classes there, but in general, I have seen all this happen over the years of a pharmacist ask a technician to do these things. If you know something's wrong, you should be speaking up to that. And then speak up if you witness any drug diversion or theft, either a fellow employee on the job or employee violating policy. And speak up of other things in the pharmacy: improper drug security. If you see the C2 cabinet being left open all the time and you know it's supposed to be closed, who do you report that to? Unsanitary, unsafe conditions. Those are other things that you're working there and you're seeing these things. Who can you report those to? Healthcare fraud. There have been cases over the years where it's an employee who actually reports the fraud to the state or federal government of things they know that are going wrong at a pharmacy. There's fraudulent billing schemes, there's bogus claims, there's billing going on where the patients aren't getting anything, they're just submitting claims, bogus claims. There's others where a different drug is being provided than what's being billed for, or different quantities. We've seen all that. There's also fraud involved in reversing claims when prescriptions are returned to stock and not picked up by a patient. If those are billed to insurance, they need to be they need to be reversed with the insurance company when they are returned to stock. Same thing with nursing home returns. We've seen times where things are being reused but not being credited back to the insurance provider or maybe to the patient who's paying for it. And then owed medication, that's when a pharmacy doesn't have enough to fill a prescription initially. They're going to owe some to the patient. They get that ready and the patient never comes, picks it up. That if it's been billed to insurance and they didn't get it, then that partial amount should be reversed to the insurance. So those are all different types of healthcare fraud. You should be aware of that and know how to report it if you see these. Technicians play an important role in preventing errors. You do a variety of tasks in the pharmacy. A lot of it's related to filling prescriptions that go directly to the patient. So when you're filling prescriptions, if you have questions on what you're doing, ever in doubt, make sure you ask. Make sure you double check your work. Slow down and stay focused. Pharmacies are very busy today. There's staffing issues. There's just lots going on. There's lots of distractions going on. Do your best to avoid them and stay focused on the work that you're doing. And make sure you're following pharmacy policies and procedures. They're there to protect the public. We see times where employees, they know what the policy is, but they change it to make it easier on the work they do, but they bypass a safety feature when they do that sometimes. Make sure you're offering counseling to the patients. Usually that is the role we see in pharmacy. That's the technician who does that. However, you need to make sure that's being done. And then most pharmacies have some kind of error reporting policy. If you come across errors, make sure you know how to report those per your pharmacy's policy. There's lots of new opportunities in the last few years related to the work technicians do. I'm just going to briefly go over some of these we've covered in other webinars, newsletters. A lot of these are in the practice guide now. There's information about all these in the practice guide. So one is remote activities and supervision. You're now allowed to do remote work outside of a pharmacy. Previously, technicians could not work outside of a pharmacy. These are all non-dispensing activities, but you're able to do that and be supervised remotely, which means depending on what the activity is, that could just be being able to talk to a pharmacist via a telephone if needed. But you have a lot more opportunity now. You can work outside of the pharmacy. You can also work inside the pharmacy without a pharmacist there doing certain functions. You cannot prepare, compound, or dispense and provide product to the patient, but you can do other things in the pharmacy and be supervised remotely by a pharmacist off-site. An example would be technicians come in earlier in the morning than the pharmacist gets there. They could be doing certain things. Again, there's certain things they can't do, but there are certain things that they could be doing previously that would not have been allowed. So those allows more opportunity there. We now allow technicians to do remote data entry. That means they can do it from anywhere outside the pharmacy. It could be a prime example, and this was going on during the pandemic, of technicians being able to work from home and doing data entry work from home. Under the Class R, that's the remote dispensing site pharmacy. That's where a pharmacy does not have a pharmacist present and a technician is allowed to operate it, do the preparing and everything of a prescription. A pharmacist will review that prescription from a remote site, and then that technician is able to provide that to the patient and make the offer to count. And then the pharmacist would have to counsel the patient there. But the technician is working with no pharmacist physically present there. So that's, we have, I'm gonna say maybe, I don't know if we have 10 yet, if we have that many or not, but we do have some of these sites operating in Missouri. They are being totally operated at the location by a technician. And then under Class Q, that's our charitable pharmacy. There's some allowances in there for technicians to be doing some work and other things while a pharmacist is not present. So more opportunities related to supervision, how you're supervised, are just opening up more avenues for you to assist in other ways in the practice of pharmacy. A new thing is technology-assisted prescription medication order verification. This became effective last August, and basically it allows a technician to check their own work or the work of another technician using technology, but it is limited to just certain products, and those products are manufacturer's unit of use, so like an inhaler, a ointment, an eye drop, something that's already packaged that doesn't require any other manipulation by the pharmacy staff. And it allows a technician to prepare that, label it, and then they're able to, using technology such as barcode technology, make and verify that the right label has been applied to the right product. And then they can dispense that. Now there's a lot of requirements in that rule. There's a lot to it, but that's just a brief summary of what the new thing a technician can do. But again, it is very limited on what types of products can be done. And then vaccine and drug administration. We now allow technicians to administer both vaccines and drugs under these two rules. There is more requirements in order for that technician to be able to do that. And I do want to call your attention that there is differences between our rules and the PrEP Act. And the PrEP Act came about through the pandemic. It is still active today, the PrEP Act is, and that is what allows pharmacists to order and administer COVID-19 vaccine, influenza, and childhood vaccines, and also allows technicians to do the administration of those. Some of the requirements in there differ from the boards. The boards may be more stringent for other vaccines under our rules. So there is a difference between those, but those are new opportunities for technicians. And this is the one where we're seeing the most uptake with these new opportunities. We're seeing lots of technicians partake in the immunization programs at pharmacies. With new opportunities come new requirements. The employer provided training is for all the things I just mentioned, and the employer does have to provide specific training for those items. And then the technician has to undergo initial and annual competency assessments for those functions. And then these four things listed below are the ones that require the technician doing it to be certified and also have a minimum of 1 year work experience before they can do it. And that would be the drug vaccine administration, the Class R, the Class Q, and then technology assisted verification. So these are all in the rules. This is really, if your pharmacy is going to be doing this, the pharmacist in charge needs to be reviewing those rules to make sure they understand all the requirements for the technicians that do this. To assist in this, the board just recently created and published a sample of what a technician immunization competency assessment would look like. I believe it's a 2-page document. We have it broken down into different sections, but here's a section on vaccine handling and preparation. Some of the things that we believe that should be included in an assessment is here. And so we put this out there as a guide to help pharmacies to help them do a good assessment on their technicians who are providing immunizations. And this can be found on the board's website. It's actually, there's a link to it on the home page of the website. And then below there is a link directly to it. There's been a lot of talk over the last few years about community health workers. and the use of pharmacy technicians as community health workers. I will tell you the Department of Health has a webpage dedicated to community health workers if you want to know more about it. And then below here is what the guidance that the board has issued on this, on when a technician is being used as a community health worker. The first paragraph there is when they're doing, a technician is doing it on behalf of another entity outside of a pharmacy for another entity that would not be subject to the board's oversight. The second paragraph talks about if it's being done on behalf of a pharmacy, that it would be in the board's jurisdiction. And it goes on to say you need to have some policies and procedures in place, and that you need to make sure that there's no professional judgment being done by that technician when they're doing this community health work. So at this time, that's all. We get a variety of questions on community health work, as at the current time, this is the only guidance we can provide you. I'm going to now move on to some of the compliance issues we see with technicians on inspections and investigations. So the one is failure to offer counseling. Again, usually this is a technician at the cash register is the one who's offering the counseling. We find a lot of times on inspection it's not being done. We find in technicians are actually providing counseling, which is the role of the pharmacist or a supervised intern. The technician should not be performing the counseling themselves. We watch technicians reconstitute oral antibiotic suspensions and then provide them directly to the patient without a pharmacist checking that before it goes. Technicians involved in handling tablets and capsules, that's kind of like filling a bubble card or a multi-med pack. Gloves need to be worn when that's done. There's examples we've come across where a technician is using someone else's password. The two most common would be for CSAUS, that's C2 ordering, or the pseudoephedrine cells. There have been times where we come across technicians, this is usually an investigation issue, where the technician has used a pharmacist's password to do something in the computer. Two new requirements last August, all employees need to wear name badges now. So we are finding technicians who don't have name badges on. And then all licenses, including technicians, need a photo posted with their license certificate. Some other inspection issues, these may not be directly tied to what we see, but usually a technician is involved somewhere in some of these activities. But outdated drugs in inventory, a lot of times it's the technician who's been assigned to that task. Overfilled stock bottles, that usually occurs when staff is pouring back a return to stock or something they counted, pouring it back in a stock bottle it didn't come from. Improper labeling of return to stocks. A lot of times that is the technician's role of returning prescriptions. Products being stored on the floor. A lot of times, that could be the response. A technician has done that. The shelf is out of room. The technician needs to put it somewhere. They put it on the floor. That's no longer allowed. It needs to be in a tote or something else off the floor. Dispensing errors. We get complaints about dispensing errors. Dispensing errors, a lot of times if a technician, especially when it's order entry error, a technician was the one that was involved in that. Incomplete, inaccurate compounding records. Again, a lot of times it's a technician who's doing the compounding, filling out those records. A pharmacist, checks those eventually, may not catch that, but a technician is the start of the process there. And because a lot of technicians are doing the compounding, we do collect samples for testing and they fail potency. So it kind of comes back to who compounded it. Did they do the right procedures? Did they weigh the right things out? So these are all things that we might not actually witness them doing, but are tied to things we find on inspections that technicians are probably involved with. Sterile compounding, we find a variety of issues. I mean, a lot of times it's the technician who's actually in doing the compounding. We find past due skills assessment and media fills that are required to be done either annually or at a different schedule depending on your risk level. We watch hand washing, garbing, and aseptic technique while we're in inspection, and we find that being done improperly. And then other things during the, like disaffecting your gloves during the compounding area, blocking first air, other activities like that. And then usually it is the technician who does a lot of the cleaning in there, and we find improper cleaning techniques. And then we find failure to document all these things that are going on. And again, a lot of it falls back on the technician, even though a pharmacist should be checking all that. It's the technician probably who failed to document it. And again, always not following policies and procedures. Sterile compounding has lots of policies and procedures related to that. On investigation issues, we the most probably common thing we investigate complaint-wise is technicians terminated, and they're terminated for a variety of things. I would say the most common two are the first two here. I'm not sure if they're in the right order there of what's the most common, but drug diversion, that's the theft of both controlled and non-controlled from the pharmacy. Could be directly from the stock, it could be filled prescriptions being taken, or there's other methods that diversion occurs. That the theft of merchandise, cash, food, drinks, gift cards have caused lots of problems over the years. Coupons, reward programs, employee discounts, undercharging customers, and improper credit and return processing are all reasons get reported to us because for a technician being terminated. The board does investigate all those. Dispensing errors, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times technicians may have been involved somewhere in the process that led to an error. We do get complaints about the violation of patient confidentiality, or HIPAA, where a technician may have unintentionally violated that by selling a prescription to the wrong patient. But there's also times that we find patients deliberately violating this by intentionally using confidential information for other purposes outside of the pharmacy. Failed and refused employer drugs test, and then criminal activity. These are all things, some of the common things we conduct investigations on related to technicians. The board can take different actions when a technician, after an investigation's done. Public record would be the employment disqualification list. That is a method that the board can prevent you from working in a pharmacy for a set period of time. Conditional registration is more like probation. You can work, but there's certain terms on how you may be able to work. One may be you have to do random drug testing if you had a previous drug or substance abuse issue, or possibly criminal activity related to that. Sometimes the board may request that you have random drug screening. And again, that is a set period of time. Non-public actions would be letters of warnings or concerns. You can still work in a pharmacy, but the board's putting you on notice via a letter that they had concern about something, and sometimes they ask you for a corrective action on how you would prevent that from happening again. And also warns you that future issues may lead to board taking more permanent action, like I mentioned above. So the last fiscal year, 2022, that ended in June of last year. The board disqualified 25 individuals, and conditional registration was issued to 21. That's pretty consistent for the last 3 to 4 years, but prior years prior to that, the numbers were much greater. So we're actually, from years ago, the numbers are down a lot, but the last few years, these are pretty consistent. And you see the different breakdown of different issues here that technicians were either disqualified or given conditional registration for. So we'll move on now to just some of the resources that are out there. The board does have guides out there for on the website. We have one specifically called the Technician Information Guide. There's a picture of it there. It's specifically written for technician issues. The board also has a regulatory quiz. It's an online quiz just to check your knowledge of things related to technician regulation. And then the practice guide, if you're not familiar with that, that is a comprehensive guide that covers all areas of practice in the pharmacy world. It's written, we try to write it in layman's terms so it's easier to understand than reading the regulation itself. It has lots of guidance on all kinds of topics in there. We just revised that in January. It's found on the board's website. It's also, we just got done mailing a copy, a physical copy out to all pharmacies. So all pharmacies, if you haven't received it, it should be coming very shortly because it has been showing up in pharmacies. The ones I was in last week had already received theirs. And then all the boards on the board's website, if you go to the news and publication resources link, there are lots of different guides, information under that link there. If you need to contact the board, there's different methods to do that. You can always call the board office. However, email is probably the best way to communicate with the board. I think you'll more likely get a quicker answer than that way if you email the board. The board inspectors, as I mentioned, you go to the board's website under board information and click the inspector link, and then you'll get a list of the inspectors by their counties. In St. Louis, it's broken down by zip code, and you can figure out who your inspector is. It has contact information on that for each of the inspectors. And then there are two methods on the board's website that you can just submit a question to. The first one goes to the board office if you have questions for the board office, application questions, general questions. There's another one that goes to inspectors. If you have a compliance question, you can send a question that way. Another thing you can do is stay informed. If you're not signed up for our email alerts, anybody can sign up for them. Technicians are encouraged to sign up. You can either get an email or a text message when we send out one. We send them out whenever we have a newsletter. We have usually 4 newsletters a year, but we also send out numerous alerts in between those on whatever topic we believe needs to get out there to everybody. So there's a link on the board's website. On the home page, if you go down to the bottom, there's this little box that says Get Board News. You click that, you'll get taken to the website where you can sign up for that. And then there's a direct link down below there. Okay, so we're going to have time for some questions today. So give me a second to switch over and pull up some of the questions that have come in. And if you have questions, you want to submit them, here's again a reminder of how to do it. Go to your toolbar and you can just type your question in and hit send. Someone did give us some feedback on using their CE certificate for the last time they used some of the board's CE. They said TCVA did accept it, but it did get flagged, and they asked them to send them some. It looks like it said it was just resend them some more information about it. So again, I would highly recommend you talk to the certifying before you assume that it will be accepted. I would get that directly from them. And someone wants to know if they work at different locations in the same company, do they need to, how do they report that to the board? We really only have place for one address. I believe, on that form. I would just put the address of the location that you work at regularly, the most if you're a floater. If not, I would just pick one, and as long as it's in the same company, we would have you working at that company. But I do not believe we have room for numerous addresses and locations. Someone's asking about technology assisted verification and how does counseling fit into that. So the new opportunity I talked about is where a technician can check the work of themselves or another technician for unit of use or things that have been previously checked by the pharmacist, such as maybe a prepackaged product, maybe a bubble card, something like that, that has already been prepacked and checked by a pharmacist. They can use technology to check that. They want to know how the counseling fits in. Well, the counseling would be as normal. The prescription's verified, it then gets sold to the patient. At the time that patient is sold, there needs to be an offer to counsel. Now, this is different from Class R, where Class R, you have the technician, working remotely at a dispensing site. The technician does all those things. The pharmacist, the technician prepares the product, the prescription. A pharmacist remotely is going to verify that it is the correct stuff using technology. And then when that technician makes the sale to the patient in a Class R, this is different from other pharmacies. Under Class R, the pharmacist has to counsel the patient. So what happens there is there's a video screen and the pharmacist comes on and counsels the patient when they're picking it up. And that's different from other pharmacies that can just give an offer to counsel. At Class R, it's mandatory that counseling takes place unless it's refused by the patient. Someone wants to know, where can a technician get certified to administer vaccines? The board does not provide that. Different organizations do. MPA, the Missouri Pharmacy Association, I believe occasionally does offer that. If you're looking for that, I would suggest you reach out to them. I believe there's some national organizations that also may offer it. I'm not sure if the schools in Missouri, the pharmacy schools, are offering any of that for technicians, but you might check with them too to see if they offer one for technicians. But there are other organizations that do provide that training. Someone's asking to clarify what needs to be on the wall, licenses on the wall, and what can be kept in a binder. So last August, if you're not familiar, last August we revised the practice, the standards of practice regulation, and made lots of changes to a variety of things in there. One of the things we did change was to allow the individual licenses to be doesn't have to be on the wall, but they can be kept in a binder or some other location. There's some pharmacies that they employ so many, they just don't have enough wall space, in a public area to get them all that. Now, if you do the binder thing, you do have to make it available to the inspector. You'd also have to make it available to the public if the public wanted to see licenses of someone. But you can use the binder for individuals. So pharmacists, interns, and technicians, you can put their certificate in a binder. You still have to have the photo with the certificate. So you can't have a binder of certificates and then say, hey, our photos are on the computer. That won't work. We've had people ask about HR records had photos. Can you just show us that? No. You have to actually have a photo with the certificate. So in the binder would be the certificate, license certificate, and the photo. What you do need to post on the wall in a conspicuous public place is the board's license, the pharmacy permit would need to be on the wall. That should not be in the binder. Someone asked about, do the guidelines also apply to pharmacy students? I'm not sure which guidelines you're asking about, so you may want to resubmit your question and let me know what guidelines you're talking about. Again, someone wants to know, how do you become able to vaccinate? Okay, so the board requires you to, one, you have to be certified. So first thing, you need to be certified. You have to have a 1 year minimum experience license as a technician. That can be in another state. It doesn't have to be in Missouri. You have to be trained and assessed by your employer. And then you would have to go through and complete an immunization training program. And that's what I was talking about earlier about those programs. The board doesn't offer that, but there are organizations out there that do. And then you would also have to have a current CPR or BLS certificate in order to immunize. So those are the things you need to have in order to vaccinate. So starting with, you'd have to make sure you're certified and then go out there and get that training and get CPR certified on that. We do get questions sometimes about technicians. Do they have to do CE? Pharmacists have to do some CE related to vaccinations. No, technicians do not. And then we get questions about, do I have to submit a notice of intent like a pharmacist does? The answer is no, technicians do not need to do that. And a third question is, do technicians need to sign the protocol? No, there's not no, technicians do not sign the protocol. Someone's asking, if you renew, do you have to have the paper certificate in place by May 31st, or can you just verify your license on the website? The website's sufficient. You can always go to, if you're doing a renewal and you don't have your certificate mailed to you yet, you can always go to the board's website and do a license verification to show that you are current. Someone asked, they missed the first part of it. Is this being recorded? Yes, it's being recorded. It may be 10 to 15 days before it becomes available on the board's website, but we do post all this. And we also send out an email alert alerting people that we posted a webinar recording. Is the board considering making technician certification mandatory? There's been talk about that over the years. Currently, their approach is no, I would say, and it's just specific activities. As I mentioned earlier, the 4 that has to be, that's the board's approach. They are not looking at this time to make everyone be certified, but depending on what new opportunities come in the future, some of those might require certification in addition to the 4 that I mentioned. They want to know, is there going to be a way for community health workers to register with the Board of Pharmacy? The only registration with the Board of Pharmacy as a technician. The board does not register, certify community health workers. We only register technicians. As I mentioned earlier, a technician could be doing some of that work, but no, the board will not be certifying or registering community health workers. I believe you need to look at the Department of Health's website. They may have a program for that, but I can't speak to that. Okay, let's see what time we got here. Let me see if I can get some more questions pulled up real quick. Someone wants to know can you give examples of things that technician can and can't do without a pharmacist present? I think they're talking about the example of coming in early. So a technician without a pharmacist in the dispensing area cannot prepare, compound, dispense, or otherwise provide medication to the patient. So they can't be doing any of that. What they could be doing is they could be doing data entry. They could be handling stock, putting drug orders away. They could be checking for out dates. They could be doing stuff like that. They can do anything but those four things are the things that they are prohibited from doing without a pharmacist present, except for the classes, those classes that I spelled out that have some exemptions built in for them. So those are some of the things. They could take a prescription over the phone, stuff like that, but they can't be involved in preparing the actual prescription. So like counting and labeling the bottle, doing any compounding or selling or providing medication to a patient. Let's see if we can find, let's see. Someone has a question, said they moved from another state. Will they be able to renew even though they didn't pay personal property tax? Okay, personal property tax payment is not a requirement for your registration. It's income tax in Missouri. So that House Bill 600 that I was talking about, it doesn't involve personal property tax. And questions about income tax really need to be sent to the Department of Revenue on that. Okay, well, we're getting to the end of our time here, so we're going to have to finish up here. So going forward, we do have some more webinars scheduled. Tuesday, May 16th, we're going to have one dedicated to drug distributors and third-party logistic providers. Again, this is one that's, not your standard topic for pharmacists, but pharmacists can do this program and get CE for it. And then on Thursday, June 8th, Mo Health Net is going to be coming and giving an update. As I mentioned, we do recordings. This slide's out of date. Those are our 2019 webinars. So we do have this is the first webinar of 2023, the one we're doing today, but we do have all previous ones on the board's website. And then for continuing education, you must complete the post survey at the end of the program. So what will happen is I will announce that I'm going to close the webinar. When I say that, do not close your browser. Leave your browser open. A little screen that will come up that says I've ended the webinar. You hit close on that. Again, don't close your browser, and a survey will open up. A separate window will open up. That has 5 questions on it. You answer the questions and click submit. We do know some people have trouble getting the questions, especially if you're using a smartphone or tablet. If you have any trouble and you don't get the questions, you can email us at compliance@pr.mo.gov and we will email you the questions. However, you must have your answers back to us by email within 24 hours if you want to receive CE. And again, in order to get CE, you have to be logged on under your name to go to the webinar site. The board will send out a certificate. It will be emailed in approximately 30 days. It's emailed now. We no longer mail them, so check your email going forward. And again, a reminder to save your certificates because the board does not submit to the CPE monitor. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope all the technicians on here found this helpful, and I wish you all have a good day. I'm going to end the webinar now.